Was that tuning out when you need to
Yeah.
Councillor Mancini, or tuning out Councillor Mancini?
I think both.
Both, yeah, good. That's an important skill.
Okay.
Thank you very
Everybody
much.
be polite now. Okay.
So I am
They-
ready, Mr. Chair, if you wanted to. I'm not sure where I am on the list, but
I have just pasted the list into the chat. With this going live, I'm just going to confirm with the clerk that we are live on the internet.
Just confirming, it does
Okay.
take a couple of seconds. We are live, Mr. Chair. You are good to go.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome everybody back to the second day of talking about the Transportation and Public Works budget for the 2021-22 fiscal year. As usual, at the beginning of these meetings, I would like to run through a list of the speakers just to make sure that we have an audio and video check for everybody. So starting with District 1, Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, fellow councillors and mayor. Happy to be here today and figure out Transportation and Public Works.
There we are. Thank you very much and good morning. District 2, Councillor Hensby.
President accounted for, Mr. Chairman, ready to hit the road.
Good stuff. Thank you. District 3, Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm here and ready to get on with it.
Good stuff. Thank you. District 4, Councillor Purdy.
Good morning, Chair and colleagues. Happy to be here. Looking forward to today.
Yes, as am I. Thank you. District 5, Councillor Austin.
I'm here, Mr. Chair, ready to put the TPW budget to bed.
That would be nice. Thank you. District 6, Councillor Mancini.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, colleagues. Happy Purple Day to everybody. I'd like to acknowledge today is International Purple Day to bring awareness to epilepsy around the world, started by one of our own, Cassidy Megan, when she was 9 years old, to recognize that epilepsy needed more attention. And so at 9 years old, she started to advocate for it. And now it's in over 85 countries around the world. And so we're very proud of Cassidy, and I wear my purple today in honor of that Purple Day.
Good stuff. Thank you very much, Councillor Mancini. District 7, Councillor Mason.
Hello, Mr. Chair. Hello, colleagues from beautiful District 7, Halifax South Downtown. Not a sunny and beautiful day like we've had the rest of this week, but still a beautiful day nonetheless.
Yes, still a great day to end the week on. District 8, Councillor Smith. I don't see you in the list. We will come back to Councillor Smith. District 9, Councillor Cleary.
Hello, Mr. Chair. Hello, colleagues. You'll see in the background here, Portia and Louise. It was announced this morning that, of course, Louise Renault, a good District 9 resident and voice of Information Morning for about 11 years now, and a journalist for decades, will be leaving the show in June. Very sad day. But, you know, there's always progress. But as a member of the Do crew, I'll miss Louise. Thanks for all your hard work on Information Morning.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. District 10, Councillor Morse.
Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. I'm ready to roll.
Good stuff. Thank you. District 11, Councillor Cuddle.
Bon matin, mes amis. Good to be here. Happy to get on with the rest of the TPW budget. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. District 12, Councillor Stoddard.
Good morning, everyone. Oops, I think, am I on mute? No. Okay,
No,
sorry.
you're good.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Mr. Mayor, colleagues, and those listening from home. I just wanted to say I'm ready to go and looking forward to finishing off the budget today. During the break, I'll have to put on my purple. It is one of my favorite colors, and I forgot today. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. District 13, Councillor Lovelace.
good morning. Coming to you live from Hams Plain St. Margaret's. Thrilled to be here and just want to give a shout out to the children at East St. Margaret's School in Indian Harbor. Good morning.
Oh, good morning. Councillor 14, District 14, Councillor Blackburn.
Hi, good morning, everybody. And just want to send a quick shout out to everybody over at Millwood High. We're thinking of you. You got this, and you'll be back to regular classes next week. So stay strong.
Good stuff. Thank you very much. And District 16, Deputy Mayor Outfit.
Good morning to all from Bedford Wentworth. I'm looking forward to continuing the budget today, and there is a purple stripe in my shirt. I was able to find something with some purple. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
There we go. Thank you very much. Mayor Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everybody. Would also acknowledge, am I off mute? Yeah.
Yes, you're good.
Acknowledge Cassidy Megan and the great work that Tony mentioned that Cassidy's done. We raised the purple flag earlier this week. Yesterday, we also raised a flag here at City Hall for the 200th anniversary of this incarnation of Greek Independence Day. And as we raised it, a Greek Canadian was reading a budget in the legislature. So it was kind of a cool thing. And also best wishes to Louise Renault, who I think has been very stellar in the mornings. They won't be the same. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. And since we're talking about anniversaries, today is the 100th anniversary of the Blue Nose. And there is a tribute on Facebook this morning, hosted by the Blue Nose 100 page. So at this point, I'd like to move ahead. We are continuing with the list of speakers where we ended on Wednesday. So Councillor Kent, you have the floor. And you are on mute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate you giving me a few minutes to get myself organized here. So I just want to start with green bins and blue bags. I just want to offer up an update. As many of us had a few minutes to talk about this before, we are all receiving emails and correspondence regarding some concerns as if a decision has been made. We certainly are I'm certainly okay with receiving the briefing notes, but I just want to be very clear that constituents of Dartmouth South Eastern Passage are very concerned about service reductions. So I'm putting that out there. Want to make sure that folks are aware there has been a nonstop, including this morning, engagement from the public, which is really appreciated. It's hard during COVID-19 limitations to get out and have public meetings and such. We do rely on people to send their notes and reach out through emails and phone calls and social media. So I just want to acknowledge that I'm still very concerned around reductions around in waste collection related to green bins and recycling, but I'll look forward to that response, that briefing note, and see where this goes. I do as well want to talk a little bit. I think Brad is on the line, I assume. I just want to ask a question around the briefing note that came out around traffic calming and that 1.5. Is it okay to ask a question here on that? I think he touched on it yesterday, Mr. Chair.
Mr. English, are you prepared for that?
I sincerely apologize. We're having a bit of a technical glitch here this morning. Can you just please repeat the question?
Yes, Brad, we received your budget adjustment listing briefing, and are you okay to answer some questions on that?
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to know how married you are to the list. Looking at some of the considerations that would be within the District 3 area. I noticed that on the traffic calming list that is within the framework that we have right now, I'm not seeing it very much consideration or review expectations for the Eastern Passage area where we have some significant problems. Also on this briefing list, I'm seeing a few streets that are absolutely within the Dartmouth South area have very heavy concerns as well. But I want to know, is there any flexibility in that still for us to have some conversations around where that might go? If that's
Councillor, that's one piece of the briefing note that we probably should have included. I think it was in there very briefly, is the direction from council as given for that briefing note was very specific. We were to follow the existing ranked streets. And so that's exactly what we've done. We've gone down the list in priority. The only, and as you can see, it's fully transparent as to which streets were skipped. And those would be ones requiring vertical deflection because it's just impossible to plan them at this stage, and there isn't the resources in the budget to do them. And that certainly affects certain areas and certain councillors. But as this specification was given, that is what is yielded. Is there time to change that? I'll leave that to council. Look, I want to be very clear. We put a number of risks in that briefing note around adding this $1 million at the last moment. We've come back with a vertical deflection package in accordance with the prioritized list. And so once we start to vary from that, you know, we get into an area of just further concern whether we can get the work out the door and done. So, you know, it really comes down to if you want to start changing the list, that may take too much time and we may not be able to live up to the commitment that we've put forward in that briefing note.
Okay, I appreciate the clarity on it because I want to know what's at play when we have those kinds of conversations. And I do appreciate as well, Brad, that your openness to have conversations with us and considerations around street priorities within the district, you know, as we go forward and with expectations of maybe some changes that come forward on the AO and such. So I'm good. You know, I do still have concerns around some streets within the district that clearly you know, there are so many, and I acknowledge that there's so many, we can't do them all, but I want to make sure that the heavy, really, you know, very high risk ones are addressed. And I have raised concerns around the framework before, and you've been very considerate around acknowledging that. So I appreciate that TBW staff, your team are working so hard to help us address this. I really feel that sincerity. It's not as always easy as a counselor to convey that to the public around our position of having the challenges to one, create framework that is fair and reasonable, but two, that to manage those expectations in the community when so many people are feeling vulnerable and feeling at risk. So kudos for that. We'll continue to do what I think will do better. And I'll leave it there. Thank you very much. If I have any other questions, I'll come back, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Stoddart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to provide a little feedback on the green bin and recycling blue bag issue. I've had some comments from residents in my area, and they are all against changing anything with the blue bags, and they are also against having the green bins go back to every 2 weeks. They've talked about rat infestation. They've talked about raccoons getting into the green bins, which I've experienced myself. They've talked about semi-detached homes that don't have a lot of backyard space to put the blue bags. They don't have a lot of room to put their green bins, keeping them away from the exterior of the house. There have been suggestions in the area about how to tie your green bin down with the bungee cords and things like that. But a lot of the residents in this area would like to have the blue bags continued to be picked up weekly and to have the green bin picked up as it has been weekly. For those reasons. And I would just like to let the residents know that I put this forward, and I will let the council and the department know of their concerns. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I've also been hearing similar concerns. 100% of the residents out here that have gotten in touch with me would like to see the green bins remain weekly through the summer. And they would also like to see the blue bags remain weekly through the summer. So that is how I will be voting. Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My comments are along the same line, and actually a question of clarification for the process of residents to voice their concerns, because I remember on Wednesday when we were discussing this, one of the comments was the surprise that there weren't more complaints last summer due to the bi-weekly service, and it was expected that more complaints would come in. So when I directed a couple of my residents towards 311, thinking, well, maybe our business unit needs to know the responses from our residents, 311 directed them back to me, which is fine. I want to hear what the constituents want, and they are against this. Actually, I heard from one who was okay with doing it for environmental concerns, but the overwhelming everyone else, and there was a lot, an onslaught, are very much against this. So how do we share this with Brad and his supervisors to let them know that the responses of the public towards this potential decision, we do not 311, that's not the way, or do we just forward emails? So I'm just wondering, what is the process for that type of public engagement with our business unit?
I would look to Mr. Anguish to determine the best way for us to share this information with him. Would you like to know about each event or categorize them, or we direct it back to 311?
Well, 311 would not be appropriate. That is not a good use of the system. It's designed to deal with service requests, not feedback. So that would not be a good use. Plus, it would impact the ability to move service requests. So it's not appropriate. I just want to recast where we are because I'm hearing staff a lot. Staff brought forward a presentation in which we advised you there were over options that you had asked us to consider, services you asked us to consider in the budget, but we couldn't fit in. Those are some of the ones you've requested briefing notes. Accordingly, we brought under options for council's consideration if you wanted to avail yourself of them. As at this point in time, of the 7 briefing note requests we have, one of them is to come back to you with a green cart a weekly summer green cart briefing note. To be clear, that briefing note will be very brief. We have already outlined the costs. We have outlined the implications. So really, this comes down to a decision of council at the budget adjustment list. This is, quite frankly, once you've requested it to go into the budget adjustment list, this is council's to control. And so certainly directing calls towards us, we can lend some thought as to how to do that. But to be frank, it's going to come down to a vote of council as to whether you exercise this option that you've asked for a briefing note on to cut costs. Likewise, if based on the feedback over the last day, you're reconsidering the need to move forward with a briefing note, obviously staff would be grateful to not have to do that work. But other than that, I'd have to get back to you with kind of the best way to do that, because again, there's a lot of work to be done over the next few weeks with the budget, and I'm not sure the value of staff receiving all of this input, unless for whatever reason at this point, council would direct there to be community consultation, which is a whole other endeavor that could potentially delay your decision around budget. So I don't have a good answer for you now as to where to put those requests, that feedback, other than, we do monitor social media. We do monitor all the input that comes through the clerk's office. So I just want to be careful how much work we're driving into the process when we're on a very fine timeline to get through this with council. So I apologize, I don't have a better answer. Perhaps I'll work offline here to see if there's a desired outlet to drive this feedback, but I just want to be clear. This is in council's hands, unless you want staff to carry out some specific kind of consultation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And I appreciate the response. There was some feedback there for a second. The CAO has popped up, so I'd like to hand the floor to the CAO.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and through you to the councillor. So I think Brad has summed it up pretty well. I just want to say this, is that if the question is how do you get your citizens' feedback back through to council and to staff, then certainly that is easily done in these meetings. Like you're the elected representative, and you can express the concerns you're hearing from your constituents during this meeting. Under no circumstance would I suggest that the citizens engage directly with the staff with their feedback. If they have feedback to offer, then they can send that in writing or through email to the clerk's office. And that correspondence is always shared with the pertinent business units associated with the particular issue and with council. Right. So those are the two venues, either through this discussion, either today or at the budget adjustment list meeting, the budget adjustment debate will be held on council. You will have a chance then to debate every item on that budget adjustment list, taking into account the feedback you would have received from your citizens. So that is the process we're in now. Unless council tells me to get out there, as Brad says, to do some broader public consultation, that is the process. We don't have, and Brad points out, we do not have time in the current budget process to get out there and consult on this. We already did a budget consultation piece with the public. We've sought input, and of course, these are granular kinds of debates, right? So these are granular issues that are going to come out of this. Out of these deliberations from council. So we can't go out and consult on all these granular issues in the time frame that we have to land the budget. So I hope that helps. Thank you.
It does. And just to say that, thank you. I totally understand that, and it makes perfect sense. I was under the impression that the briefing note would assess all of the impacts. So I thought that would be the impact on residents, not just financial. So I thank you. I understand much better now, and it makes sense. So thank you.
Thank you. And I didn't mean to suggest or imply that residents would be contacting Mr. Anguish. I meant that residents would be contacting us, the councillors, and we would aggregate or pass on their concerns. So if there was any confusion there, I hope that clears it up. Councillor Mason.
Wow. So I'm going to talk a little bit about process here before I talk about what I want to talk about. And first is, unless someone wants to put a motion on the floor of rescission, this is all going to be discussed again when the briefing note comes back. So this is not a great use of our time, in my opinion. We voted 10-7 to have the briefing note. That's what's happening. Second thing is they advise us. We're the deciders, advisors, deciders. So we have to make the decision, and sometimes we have to make decisions that don't make everybody happy, which leads to my third point, which is the people who don't like something are the ones who call. The people who don't care or like something, they don't call, right? So of course you're going to get a lot of people who are against it. Those are the people who are going to pick up, they're motivated to pick up the phone. You got to weigh that carefully. I remember one former councillor saying, I changed my mind on a vote because a lot of people reach out to me, and stuffed them out, and CBC said, how many people emailed you? And she said 6. And it's like, it was a major policy statement. I'm not sure that's actually enough to generally change direction. And then the final piece, with all respect, Mr. Chair, it's inappropriate for you to say how you're going to vote from the chair. So those are my what I was going to say things about this. Sorry. I'll try and cut it down to 2 minutes out of respect for everybody's time. I talked about 3 buckets: capacity for large programs, Vision Zero, and safety, and the funding gap. I talked about capacity. We had the discussion yesterday at Transportation Standing Committee. We have major projects. Some of them are AT projects, but most of them are the major road functional plans. Portland Street, Windsor Street Exchange, Herring Cove Road, Bedford Highway. And I saw some real concern on Brad's face, and I understand that concern when I said I want to still be talking about those because I don't want to wait 5, 6, 7, 8 years. I don't think we can wait at the pace that we're growing. We need to get to a place where we're satisfied with the plans. We need to start building as fast as possible. And Brad said, well, we're built into the 4-year capital budget, which I totally understand, but one of the reasons in this COVID year that I haven't been pushing this earlier is we have the June discussion about strategic projects coming, and we're still waiting for the actual price tag for the capital plan. And I know this shows there's like a yes minister about what I'm about to say, which is Herring Cove comes in and it's only $21 million, only in quotes, air quotes. And I'm like, well, that's a lot less than I thought these kind of big changes were going to be. We need to expedite this. So I think I just want to flag for staff. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure to move these things faster. And that comes to capacity. We don't have enough staff to deliver those. I've already spoken about Vision Zero, and that ties into my last piece, which is the funding gap. You know, we get a lot of emails from certain activists in that community, and they want to have a separate, they're really concerned about managerial accounting. They want to have a separate budget for this is how much money we're spending on safety, rather than having it amalgamated into the budget. And the funding gap is that everything's costing 25% more than it used to, because we're building complete streets. That means that between $8 and $9 million a year, additional cost in that existing budget is going towards safety issues because of complete streets, which is amazing, right? That's a lot of money for a city our size. And I'm not convinced, I don't at all think that we should have a separate budget so that we can point to it and pat ourselves in the back. Everything we build should be safe at whatever the cost is. But the issue is we're spending all that money and we're not staying on top of the PCI. So my question to Brad is, and I guess Jane and Jacques, I think council needs to provide direction this year to close that gap. And we can't do a $25 million jump in 1 year, but we need to get it into our subconsciouses. We need to humbly accept that we probably need to raise the budget on paving by $4 or $5 million a year for 5 or 6 years until we close that gap. And then that reduces our capacity without raising taxes or more federal money and all that stuff to do all the other, like we have to have that in the plan when we're allocating the money, and we have to have a plan by a date to close that gap. Might be easier now with the gas tax money, but how do we have that discussion? Because if we're doing multi-year budgeting, I think now is the time. I'm not saying for this year, I'm not saying put it on the balance sheet, but I think we need to, say for next year, we need to start moving toward closing that gap, because it's scary to me, because I can't emphasize enough. Brad's talked about it. If the roads start to crack apart and underneath the asphalt, the way it was described to me by Dave years ago is the asphalt protects the aggregate underneath, right? And if it totally falls apart and all the gravel and stuff underneath starts to wash away, the cost jumps to double, triple, quadruple, 10 times to fix that road. So if we don't spend it now, we're in big trouble. So I'm wondering if Brad and the CAO could comment on that. How do we address that? How do we make that a priority?
Absolutely. I'll start, and I'm sure the CAO can kick in. The first thing in my presentation really tried to drive home the point that the auditor is very concerned about this as well. And this was an audit recommendation to set this standard with council. We had hoped to do it during this past COVID year. We did not get to it. We have to get to it this year. So in terms of the conversation, it is coming to council. It is coming to council, and it will comprise both the updated pavement condition index. As you know, we've got the pavement management system. The work's been done. Unfortunately, as many things have gone with COVID, we thought we could have it ready for this capital year to advise you better, but at the end of the day, it won't be. But by the time we get to council, we will have the updated pavement condition index, have a stronger sense of where we're really heading. We will also have, at that point, as part of that report, options for, if you will, closing the gap. So that discussion is planned. It will be led by a report by my staff with lots of help from finance and, of course, the guidance from the CAO. So that work is coming. Second piece is, what was I going to say? I think that's what I wanted to drive home. I'll turn it over to the CAO if he wanted to add anything or.
Well, good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chair and councilors, Mr. Mayor, Brad. So Brad is absolutely right. The only thing I would say to this is that, to your point, Councillor Mason, we need to get real about the pavement condition index. Not only do we have issues around the existing network that is under control, we're going to inherit a bunch of roads from the province next year. So when you think about that and the compounding effect of that, we need to probably invest at least $5 million a year more, not even including the roads that we're going to inherit, just the existing roads that we can now have, probably at least in the smack bracket of $5 million a year for the next 5 years to catch up and have that as a baseline after that, right? So really doubling up, and I that'd be my prediction. It'll be interesting to see what the report comes back with in terms of the quantum as over the next 5 years, what we actually have to do. Then we have to add in the new road network that we're going to inherit, right? And account for that. Good news yesterday was the fact that the federal government gave us some one-time money on doubling the gas tax. So that gives us a bit of help in terms of some very strategic help, in terms of 1 year money. The other thing that I would point out is that, we have the strategic capital reserve. And I think when we have a conversation with council, and Jane, I'm sure will be supporting this along with Brad, is that we're going to need to set aside monies within the strategic capital reserve bucket for exactly this, like road condition funding, and putting money into that reserve so that we don't impact the tax rate in a negative way, in a spike way, to allow these things to happen. So we have some tools in our toolbox to address this, but it's going to take some resolve and some discipline by everyone involved to make sure that we don't end up in a situation where we're having to recapitalize entire streets. To your point, you have to fix up, you have to do patch jobs and micro sealing and those kinds of things on a regular basis to avoid the big costs of actually total reconstruction of a road or a street. Right? That's what we want to avoid. Thank you.
So if I can have 10 seconds, Mr. Chair, while you slurp your coffee, let's all just keep in mind that every dollar we put into more paving is 25 more cents going into complete streets and safety. So it's not like it's just paving roads for trucks, right? It addresses the core issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lovelace.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Oh, excellent. So I just wanted to ask a question about the Red Book. And, we have, to Councillor Mason's point, a real separation between safety on our streets and the actual infrastructure and the roadbed and the integrity of the road itself. And so I'm just trying to understand the approach by, is it that the Red Book doesn't include, those sort of features, or they're kind of a nice to have instead of a must? I'm just wondering if, to Councillor Mason's point, when we have these complete streets, we have better, healthier, more viable communities, rather than having this patchwork of, here's a little bit of extra money for safety. So I'm just wondering if you could, Brad, speak to the impacts of the Red Book and whether or not there are some, sounds like policy changes and administrative changes that need to take place.
Yes, thanks, Councillor. That is a fact. In terms of the Red Book update, Red Book is the municipal design guidelines that does guide future development. That has been a strong push of council. I'm going to defer comment. Right now, the Red Book update is in the hands of planning and development right now. Kelly's going to be prepared to give you an update when it's her turn at bat here. And so she'll give you the details on it. But certainly, yes, we have a lot of streets to go back now and rehab based on, if you will, the poor design guidelines of the past. Yes, the way to the future is to make sure those complete street guidelines are getting done. And as I think TSC saw yesterday from Elena and Bernard, in fact, people are well aware that those design guidelines exist, and they're absolutely getting involved and trying to influence them. So they are coming. I'm going to leave the rest to Kelly, but it is obviously an important part of making sure that the future is from all of the new roads created through development is appropriately designed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Outfit.
Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to speak on a couple of things. First of all, I've been speaking with Brad a fair bit lately, and it's always helpful. And I certainly want to support what's coming forward to Transportation Standing Committee and others. And I echoing sort of Becky's concerns there earlier, where I have probably even with $1 million extra into speed calming, street calming, that I'm probably not going to see much happen in my district because of the type of calming that's required. And that's a hard pill to swallow. And Brad is investigating what we're going to, for me, and I appreciate what we're going to do about schools that are on hills, because I have a real problem with schools on hills not being able to receive some sort of cost-effective speed calming that other schools will receive. So that's a bit frustrating. And even with the paving that's being done in our districts, and while we all want to work on the index, not all streets that are repaved qualify for street calming. And I've got World War III brewing in District 16 today on a street that's being paved this year and doesn't qualify for street calming, even though the residents want it. And of course, the green bag, blue bag situation, which has been lively, particularly the green bin, I meant to say. The question I have, Mr. Chair, and I can't recall the answer, and I should by now, so my apologies, is if we did want to bring forward a motion to rescind the decision for a briefing note on the green bins, is that a majority vote or a 2/3 vote? I don't know if you or John or the clerk might be able to help me with that, because I can't recall. And I should.
We went through this yesterday, I think, with one of the other committees. I believe it is a 2/3 vote. This is the same meeting as Wednesday.
So it's a 2/3 vote to have the motion to reconsider. If that motion passes the 2/3 vote, it is a majority decision on the motion that was considered at the meeting this meeting at the session on Wednesday.
Okay.
On a point of order, can we clarify on that point? I thought in our discussion yesterday in the committee, I made the motion reconsideration right immediately after the vote was taken. This is 2 days later, so does there not need a notice of motion now to go to the next budget meeting, or can we do it today, or can we just waive the rules?
It's the
2
same
points
meeting
about that.
recessed.
This is the same meeting, and on yesterday at Audit and Finance, the initial discussion was around a notice of reconsideration. This is a motion of rescission, which is a slightly different beast.
So if it requires 2/3, I'm not going to bring that forward today. We'll have a good discussion when this comes forward to the parking lot brawl, as I call it. So we'll do that when it comes forward. But I just want to share the concerns that I'm seeing in my district with the speed calming, particularly, and support Brad's comments that we certainly need to change how we the AO and how the expectations we're setting, and also the timelines that this is resulting in. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, colleagues. So I have a motion that I'm just putting in the chat here. And before I read it, though, just a little bit of background, because a lot of our colleagues are new and so they wouldn't have had the benefit of the discussion we had around non-accepted streets. So I'm not sure how many councillors are familiar with non-accepted streets. And in terms of what they are, so at amalgamation, the new HRM took over all the streets from all the different preceding municipal bodies. And there were about 100 streets that they didn't accept, meaning they didn't take them over and provide maintenance. And they're all throughout different districts. District 11, District 10, District 9 has the majority of them. And then there's a few streets here and there in a bunch of other districts. And so some of these streets aren't very dissimilar from a regular street. Others are basically just paved goat paths. Others don't have the kind of curb and gutter infrastructure that are required. So Council dealt with this, Transportation Standing Committee, then I went to Council to say, let's finally accept these streets, and staff categorized them into 3 different pots. And the first thing we had to do, though, before we could address any of them, was to do title searches on about half of them to make sure we actually owned them, because we can't do work on something we don't own. And so with COVID last year, this was dropped from the budget. It's $400,000, and the title search project never moved forward as a result. So I am going to move that the Budget Committee request a briefing note detailing the measures and implications for conducting the land title search for non-accepted streets within the proposed 2021-22 Transportation Public Works budget for consideration in the parking lot as an operating over budget option.
Second, Councillor Mason.
Councillor Mason seconds. Go ahead, Councillor Cleary.
Thank you. And so, colleagues, let's at least get the briefing note back on this. It shouldn't take very long. I mean, all of the staff reports are there on this to come forward, but this is the first step. If we don't do this, then we're pushing this out another year. And even if we do this year, the non-accepted streets, because the title search will take at least a year to get all the documentation, put it together. And it'll be really important that in the succeeding years, next year, the year after, that we actually build the plan. And it's going to take many years to put together a plan for all of these streets and to deal with them. And so I really think we need to move this forward. It's been now holy cow, 95, 96 was amalgamation. And so we are 2.5 decades past amalgamation. And we really need to move on this. And this is, yes, as has been mentioned, this is just the title search, $400,000 in Brad's over list to get this going. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to hand it over to the CAO. You have the floor. Chuck, there we go.
My apologies, Mr. Chair. I must have raised my hand by accident. Sorry. I didn't have anything to offer on this one.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Best contribution all day. Best contribution all day.
Go ahead, Sam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one quick question on this. Where this was an over in Brad's budget, I assume staff have done some thought as to what this would be. I'm just curious, as we looked at it to the parking lot, how this work is envisioned to happen. Like, do we expect to hire someone who will then come and do the title search for all these properties, or is it more of an individual sort of thing? I'm just wondering if there are options that might not be, well, let's spend all $400,000 this year, whether or not this could be something that's a little bit more phased.
Go ahead, Mr. English.
Yep, well, that's a fair question. If the briefing note gets passed, I'll have to address it there. Essentially, as Councillor Cleary very well stated, it was about a package of work, and the first phase of that work, $400,000. The solution is a completely outsourced approach because, of course, we've got, as Council has pointed out, we've got numerous property work to do to advance all of the road work and projects throughout the municipalities. So the idea here was title search would be fully outsourced. As far as scaling it, sure, there's probably some options there that if the briefing note goes through, we can include if council wanted to look at spending less. That said, I think again, Councillor Cleary put it well. If you're going to do this, you probably want to get a good start on it. And so we had taken that into consideration when we brought the first package through to council.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Brad. So based on that, I mean, what I'm hearing is, I mean, if we're going to be outsourcing this to go out with kind of one bundle and then go out again, I mean, that's kind of that's probably making more work for us than we really need to in what is a small sum in the grand scheme of things and one time. I'll vote for the briefing note. I don't know whether I can actually support this for this year, just given where our parking lot is heading. You know, colleagues, we've got a lot on that list. At Parks and Rec, there's going to be other hard discussion to be had there with a significant piece coming forward. If you've taken a look at what's the report that's coming, so you know, I'm okay with seeing the tax bill go up, but I know many folks have expressed that they're not. So these are the choices we get to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hensby.
Thank you very much. I'll be interested to see this type of report come forward. But before we even get into doing any land title searches, I'd just like to have a list of all these non-accepted streets and the current condition they're in. Like, apparently, how wide are they according to these subdivision plans? Or how long are they? How many kilometers of these streets we have? Because this non-accepted street, you're going to be opening the door to other streets that we have problems with or need to accept with different Red Book standards, I guess you could say. So that the other question is, to what standard are these streets currently built? Are they a bunch of old streets that are paved over with chip seal material, layer after layer after layer over the years, and those look as hard as asphalt, or were they asphalt, or were they some of these gravel still? Those kind of standards would have to be determined what type of street it is, and before doing title searches, I like to know in regards to the state of the road itself, and said, okay, if we accept this non-accepted street, what expectations are there to build it to a certain standard or to maintain it to a certain standard? So, there's some things like that. I can think of Village Road out in Herring Cove. That's a very narrow roadway. And that's a public street. And I question, how can a road that narrow be considered a city standard? I have other streets in my municipality, in my district itself. For instance, Scottsdale, the Muscat Island Harbor, the best private road that I've ever seen built, and they want to pave it. The residents there want to pay the full shot of paving it and transfer the municipality. But the municipality said, no, sorry, the street is too long to our standards.
Yeah.
Built great, but too long. And so I'm worried about this non-accepted standard. It opens the door to others. So I want to make sure that we have an ability to look at that report more carefully before we start doing land titles.
Okay, thank you very much for that feedback. We do have a link pasted in the chat that is the list of the non-accepted streets, and that contains some of the information. I don't see any other speakers on the motion, so Councillor Cleary to close, and then let's go for a vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for mentioning the link that I posted there from the 2019 report to council that Mr. Hensby would have voted on in 2019. So to refresh your memory, David, it's right there. You can actually see they have pictures of what some of the streets are, the 3 categories, the conditions of them, that kind of stuff. Again, this is for the title searches, and this is just for the briefing note. Mr. Anguish and his staff will bring back the information on what it'll be like. And I'd be interested to see too, and so I'll put the plug in for the briefing note, if there is a phased approach, if it has to be all done in 1 year at one shot, or if it could be spread out given our budget crunch. But it is something we do need to start on, colleagues. So I'm hoping you'll support the briefing note to go to the parking lot.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Cleary. I don't see any other speakers.
Yes, Mr. Chair. In regards to that 2019 report, if you look at it in the list, it does not give any kilometers. It just tells the street name and the district is located. I want to know the length of the road or how wide the road is. I'm sure there are subdivision plans available that we can get that so-called raw data. We don't need to go out and physically measure it, because if you start doing surveying, you got to go and try and find what the survey lines are. There should be records showing the subdivision plans. That should be a paperwork exercise, not out in the street survey. But in regards to it, that street list, in my opinion, is inadequate in regards to the data I was asking for about the length and the width of these roads. There's a quantity of streets, but I also want to know the quality of those streets, because if you want to take a non-accepted road over, then what standard it has to be brought to? That's the question I'm asking. You gave me a list of names. I want to know the condition and the length of those roads, not just where they're at.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Morse.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few examples maybe to illustrate the situation from my district. I'm aware of at least half a dozen off the top of my head, and they're fairly short, but they're on the side of a very steep slope with no drainage. And so one resident I talked to about this said it's like in the springtime, he feels like he's living on the Sackville River, because there's so much water running off the side of the hill right past his house with no drainage and down onto the Bedford Highway. So I think some of these streets are fairly short. They're actually right in the middle of the city. And if we at least got some drainage issues addressed, I think it would protect other roads. So that was the reason I brought it up yesterday. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. Councillor Mancini. I wasn't, no, you're good. Okay, thank you. Councillor Cuttle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I just want to thank Councillor Cleary for bringing this up. It isn't something I've looked at in great depth before, and I'm just wondering, like, what the issue is with these streets. So they're not. When we say they're not accepted streets, what does that mean for the level of service that they get? I don't know if someone can explain that to me.
Go ahead, Mr. English. Thank you.
Certainly, I will give it a try, and then those councillors that are living with this, they can expand upon that because they would have honestly the best sense of this. I will give the general description. So first of all, this, as Councillor Cleary put, some of these look and act like an HRM street, but the ownership is unknown. Others, as again, they don't look anywhere near a street, but they have some of the characteristics that Councillor Morris has just described. So in terms of servicing them, though, this is where it becomes very interesting, because the real problem with non-accepted streets is about their current condition and what condition should they be at. In other words, what capital investment should be made in them. That's the big issue here. For the most part, these streets are being serviced with services, which is a big issue for staff. So if you think about a street that's not constructed to standard, draws a lot of maintenance in order to keep it safe, especially if it's carrying a lot of traffic, which some of these streets do. So we through our operating budget, we are servicing these streets. No different, to point to Councillor Hensey's point, we service solid waste services go on private roads, and they do it through all sorts of manners, backing down the street, having the citizens haul it up to the top of the street, also all different types of services based on the condition of that street. The crux of this issue is about making capital investments in properties where the ownership is unknown. And so this has been going on for a very long time. It's a difficult subject for staff. Obviously, what we do is we fail safe. At the end of the day, if ownership is in question, and we know where all these streets are, if it's urgent, it gets done, because of the, what we don't want to do is endanger anybody. That said, the conditions continue to deteriorate, and we're getting to the point where we need to start to take concrete action. So that's the crux of it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And so just to Councillor Cleary, in your motion that you're making, that's on the floor right now, you're asking, I'm trying to find that motion in the chat here, where'd it go? There it is. You're asking just for a briefing note detailing the measures and implications for the land search title. So that seems to make sense, because from there we'll have the information to be able to make decisions about moving forward on what we do with these streets. So I think I will be supporting this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Outfit.
Thank you, Chair, and I will be supporting this. It's frustrating, as Sean has mentioned, how long it's gone on, and to add insult to injury of that, it's not reflected certainly in the taxes people pay if they're on a private street or if they're on a non-accepted street. So I just wanted to clarify, because it's still, I think, confusing to a number of people and myself at times, where I understand we don't do private roads anymore. Of course, when we do private driveways in development, but we don't do private roads anymore. But there are private roads out there, and of course, as we're talking about today, there's non-accepted roads. Brad, you just mentioned that we do service non-accepted roads, and I believe that is the case when you mention things like picking up garbage and plowing. But the situation that I have run into with both private and non-accepted roads is if there's a pothole, if there's a break in the road, if there is curb and gutter damage, I don't believe that we do that kind of servicing, that kind of repair work on private or non-accepted roads. And I just wanted to clarify, when you mentioned we service these roads, I think you meant plowing and garbage pickup. I don't necessarily think we do repairs, but I may be wrong. Can you just clarify for me, Brad?
On private roads?
Not accepted, sir.
Yeah, on unaccepted, we have had to do that from time to time, especially given that, again, many of these streets function, not all of them, of course, but a number of them. Absolutely, you wouldn't know you were on a non-HRM street, to be frank. So in those cases, we have to do what we need to do to keep people safe. But I can assure you, those are not private roads. These are the ones that are where the ownership is unknown. So no, just to clarify.
Okay, so if a non-accepted road calls 311 about a pothole or needing a patched curb, they do receive service.
Sorry, can you repeat that, please?
Yeah, sorry, Brad. So if somebody who lives on a non-accepted road, not private, but if somebody who lives on a non-accepted road calls 311 to request a pothole be fixed or curb patching, they will receive service?
They will, the staff will review it, and if it's needed for safety purposes, they will do it. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Councillor Mason.
So just to build on what Brad just said, Tim, so even District 7 has 4 unaccepted streets, and they're all pretty different. Some are, one's owned by a condo and they don't want to own it anymore. One is 2 components of clouded ownership, possibly private, possibly the province. And then some of them run like at a cottage right across a whole bunch of people's property. And so to answer your question clearly, yeah, they will come and patch it if it's like a 4 or 5 or 6 inch hole, right? Like if it's going to break an axle, if it's going to make it so they can't plow it or get a fire truck down it, but it's not maintained to the standard of an accepted road.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. That's my understanding. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any further speakers. Councillor Cleary.
So just to add a little bit for Councillor Cuddle's question and Councillor Outfit's question, and so Brad is right. I mean, he's very diplomatic when he says if a resident calls 311, they'll go and review it. But my experience, so I'll give you an example on Nob Hill Crescent. Staff went out and they actually took a measuring tape and measured the pothole, and it wasn't deep enough. So there was a second pothole next to it, and they came back a month later, measured that one. It wasn't deep enough. And so this went on for most of the summer, and only at the end of the summer, when residents had actually bought some gravel and some tar at Home Depot and actually performed the patching themselves, which was not a very good patch, did staff go back and fix it. Give you another example on Acorn, just off Williams Lake Road. The guardrail had fallen into one of the residents' front lawn, and staff wouldn't go pick up the guardrail because they would only fix it if it fell into the road and caused a disruption to traffic on the road. They weren't going to take their own guardrail off on someone's front lawn. The resident had to pay for the removal of the guardrail. So these are the kind of issues that we deal with non-accepted streets, because we're by policy not allowed to improve them. And so we can't change the grade for water runoff. We can't fix potholes unless they're going to be big enough to break an axle on a fire truck. Those are the issues that we deal with non-accepted streets. And to Mr. Outfit's point, this is unfair. Residents have the same tax rate, whether they're on a non-accepted street or an accepted street. And real estate agents, the people buying the homes, don't know the difference in the service level. And it is something, and as I say in the staff report, staff have already said there's 3 different types of streets. We're going to treat them differently. Some will be accepted and be treated. Others will not get the same treatment ever. And some may end up going back to the owners on that property and say, no, it's a private road. You guys got to take care of it. So, but before we can do any of that, we need to do the title searches. That's part 1. So thank you, colleagues. I look forward to this coming back to us.
Thank you very much for that. I see no further speakers, so I'm going to hand it over to the clerk to run through the roll for the question.
Beginning with District 11, Councillor Cuddle.
Patty, you were muted.
In favor.
12, Councillor Stoddard.
In favor of the motion.
13, Councillor Lovelace. Councillor Lovelace. 14, Councillor Blackburn.
Voting yes on the motion.
15, Chair Russell.
In favor.
Deputy Mayor Outfit.
Voting yes.
1, Councillor Daigle Gammon.
Voting in favor of the motion.
2, Councillor Hensby.
Affirmative.
3, Councillor Kent.
Tori, in favor of the motion.
4, Councillor Purdy.
In favor.
5, Councillor Austin.
In favor.
6, Councillor Mancini.
In favor of the motion.
7, Councillor Mason.
For the motion.
8, Councillor Smith. 9, Councillor Cleary.
Yes.
10, Councillor Morse.
Voting in favor.
Councillor Lovelace, are you there?
Voting in favor. Thank you.
Mayor Savage.
Voting in favor.
Super, that motion passes. Thank you very much, everybody. We are back on the main motion. And the next speaker is Councillor Hensby. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Go back to my notes. In regards to the solid waste and the front end processing and the waste stabilization, I have some grave difficulties of us looking at discontinuing that practice. I'm glad to hear that our garbage source separation is working well, but it's not 100%. And I'm fearful that if we do not keep a front ending processing and a waste stabilization process available, we will be neglecting our moral obligation that we made to our citizens way back when we started this whole green cart collection and source separation solid waste strategy, solid waste resource strategy. And, I'm fearful that if we don't have a front end processing and source separation, people will go back to just mixing their waste again, because since we're not source separating it, why should we have to do it ourselves? So I'm fearful of that. So I don't know in regards to our next phase. I'm looking forward to that report to come back on the solid waste strategy and what fine tuning we made to do. I've also been watching the sustained energy project down there in Chester. Is there another processing technology that can be utilized? I don't like hearing that our commercial waste is being trucked out of our boundaries. I thought the strategy was, when we first adopted it, was we are responsible for our waste and we'll keep care of our waste within our own boundaries. And now here we are finding shortcuts of diverting it by setting it outside our municipal boundaries. It may be great to those other rural municipalities that are accepting it and they're getting extra cash flow from it. But I think it's a concern that I have that we're not taking the full responsibility of maintaining our own solid waste strategy. And my other question in regards to severe storms, I hope we have a contingency plan in place for if we do have any severe storms for tree debris cleanup and collection and processing. I don't want to fly by the seat of our pants. It seems like we did in the last couple of hurricanes in regards to, we learned from our experience in the past. Let's do it again in regards to side of the road pickup. Or if we want to have centralized drop-off locations, let's have a plan ready to go to dust off whenever necessary. And my last question is going to be is in regards to the mobile solid waste depots. I'm hoping I get 3 in my district this year because they're dearly missed. I had a constituent this past week on Saturday, went to the website, saw that the facility is supposed to be open. He loaded up his car, drove from Tangier all the way to Otter Lake, a good 2-hour plus drive to find it was closed. And then not according to the website, it's supposed to be open. So our rural residents dearly miss these mobile hazardous waste depots. We need to bring them back sooner the better. That's it for my questions and comments. If I can have some update, it'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. English.
Sorry, I didn't hear any questions, so I was, let me just try and, I'll guess comment on the comments. So with the last one, solid waste events, of course, council cut them for COVID, and we have brought them back, as you heard, on Wednesday. 12 are in the budget, and council's asked for a briefing note to consider 6 more. as we promised, we will give you a snapshot of what we think would be the 6 additional locations to 12 that exist. In terms of tree debris, certainly there's really no way to predict the category of storm that we're going to get and the kind of tree fall that we're going to have, but we certainly have had 2 different approaches in the 2 hurricanes where we've experienced this over the past decade or so. Certainly in Juan, that was a door front pickup, and in Dorian, it was a self-serve process. Certainly both have been recorded. They're in our emergency management plans, and certainly drop-off sites will get updated as they go along. So as far as the degree of service, that will be a game time decision of council per normal. But I do agree with the councilor's point of view that I think staff learned from the last event that we'll act quicker to get advice from council is exactly how you want to handle it. But it does speak to the degree of storm and the type of service you choose to provide at that time. In terms of front-end processor, like I said, you'll have a report next month on staff's recommendation. Council's given very clear direction on that. You took a 5-year hiatus in reviewing, in looking at that issue. You asked staff to look back at it. Staff is preparing a report, and it'll be hopefully with you next month. And as far as exportation of waste outside municipal boundaries of commercial waste, that was a decision of council to eliminate the bylaw and allow that exportation. That remains the direction of council and therefore the direction of the system at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Mancini.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yesterday, Brad, I believe you were at the Transportation Standing Committee meeting. We had a presentation with regard to maintenance of traffic control devices. And for me, it was a very good presentation because it was the presenters were folks that one individual was a white cane user, the other person was totally blind, and their experience in moving around our municipality. And I have no idea what it's like to be in their shoes. And so I truly appreciated their presentation. I was concerned by some of the things that I heard, and it would be interesting to hear your perspective on that. They talked about, broken buttons, APS buttons, and the length of time to get them repaired, and some they've identified and still not repaired. So I'd like to understand, what's the expectation? How do citizens let people know, let our staff know that these buttons are broken, not working? How quickly can we expect them to be repaired? I understand there's a list of items they've shared with you, and I'm just wondering if you could share with us, what's the strategy that deal with those list of items? And the other question I have, Brad, is do we have in your team any expertise of any of your staff that understands those that are visually impaired and truly, when we make our decisions, are looking at things from their perspective? So if you wouldn't mind answering those questions, that'd be great. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Councillor. Yes, it was. The presentation from Marlena and Bernard was excellent and certainly new to me in my role at TPW. And I absolutely appreciate their comments. And I can tell you we're already at work here this morning. So just to try and sum up some of the things for the benefit of council, just so that a portion of their presentation was dedicated to issues that have occurred in the past, and certainly things have either been addressed or, as they pointed out, one of those was the contrasting color of the push button. Very important that the colors are different, and so they pointed out when the push button is the same color as for instance the pole. In some of the areas of our municipality where we have ornamental poles, for example, that can't occur. I can tell you that was fixed at the time, and staff understand that moving forward. If it doesn't get caught in the initial implementation of new infrastructure that's going into areas, it certainly gets rectified. In terms of, there was a comment about the Red Book and the work going on there. I just want to be clear, the Red Book will develop a complete street standard, as I said earlier, but the push button standard, they talked about the distance being too far from the crosswalk and that being a problem. Absolutely, there is a standard. It's 1.5 meters. That's followed wherever possible. The example they gave, if I remember correctly, was Robian North. One of the challenges for staff is, you know, we try to adhere to that standard. However, we have to decide in some cases what's more important, the existence of the APS at this time, or waiting until such time as the existing infrastructure is brought up to date. Because in many cases, the existing streetlight standards or the pieces that we can grab based on the wiring in the ground. And if you've ever had a chance to look underground on the peninsula, the duct banks are massive and the wiring is significant. So moving infrastructure to locate the push buttons closer to the intersection is a very, very big undertaking. So we are trying to find that balance of, do we forego the installation of APS, or do we work with the community and put it in at a greater distance, knowing that we have to upgrade it later? So that decision goes on today. Oh, how I wish we could just go and redesign our municipality and make it up to today's standards, but that was the situation they have. And certainly those situations where they're outside of standard based on old infrastructure, that does exist. And so we'll work with the community to understand what's better, to have the APS there or take it out in the meantime. In terms of I think the biggest piece though was that they brought forward was the maintenance of it. And so basically the push buttons used to be inspected every other year. It was then updated to every year. And now Tosser's team does it twice a year. The key thing we heard, and just so you understand, that's the electricians doing the inspection. So that's them arriving to do their inspection with their tool bags ready to go to do maintenance at that time. So that only happens twice a year, which is still a significant improvement on where we were. The other piece that's important here is that 311, when an APS fails and it's called in, we have a standard to respond within 1 business day. And so we will be on site and inspect. Now, we can't always fix it right away. There may be a repair time. So that's the current service standard. What's changed as a result of the presentation yesterday, we've talked to our team. We totally understand and appreciate that for a visually impaired person to arrive, press that button, and not get what they need at that time and have to call 311, that's not working because they're still faced with the challenge of crossing the road. That's unacceptable. We agree. So we've taken steps this morning to look at our staffing complement that are already out in the streets. We absolutely believe we can get the inspection up to at least 12 times, once every month as a minimum, maybe more, to be more proactive in being able to address this issue. We may be able to do it much more. So that solution is already in hand. As you can imagine, that's using some of our parking enforcement team that's already out in the street and already does some of this work for us for signage and other things. So Victoria team has stepped up. We're going to be working closely with traffic management, and that will start. That is basically started today. I think that's it. Oh, the other factor here too that council has had a significant role in is reducing the press time from 3 seconds to 1 second.
Right.
This is interesting. Everybody's perception of 3 seconds is not the same. And sometimes what occurs is they think they've held it for 3 seconds, but 3 seconds is not 1, 2, 3. And so what happens is we do get a lot of situations where people think the APS isn't working, but they just didn't quite hold it long enough. As you know, we are all already underway, removing that requirement of 3 second push. That'll be now 1 second. So those types of calls will hopefully fall away, and staff's on that now. So I think that's it. The other thing that will occur, by the way, is removing the 3 second push should also, at the end of the day, these are electronic components with a mechanical factor to them. They do fail from time to time, obviously. And the more they get pressed, the longer they get pressed, the harder they get pressed. So we're hoping some of the changes that we're making in the way the system operates will also extend their life. So that's hopefully in a nutshell what we're doing.
What about the not having any in your team expertise in your team that truly has an understanding about the visually impaired?
Oh, yeah, I can tell you, I'm not going to get into personal circumstances, but we absolutely do. We have a significantly sight impaired individual that works within the team.
So, just, Mr. Chair, just very quickly to wrap up with this, so I don't have to come back. Fantastic, Brad, that you responded so quickly to have inspections at least 12 times a year, if not more. That's fantastic. I think the municipality should be proud of that. We need to continue on that path of responding with these types of issues. Brad, I would like to see if that work plan that the presenters shared with you, if that could be maybe shared with the Transportation Committee on your response to it, so we know where those things are. Some of them may be justified, some may not be, but if that can be shared with us, that'd be fantastic. I think, when we can't fix something after a complaint, communication is the key. So right now, residents 311 is the route. The last thing, Mr. Chair, a number of years ago, in my previous life, I attended a workshop at Disney University, and one of the things I really learned that at Disney, everybody serves the public, the people that visit. So that means if a manager saw a piece of garbage on the floor, even though it wasn't the manager's job per se, the manager picked it up. So for us as counselors, staff, if we see one of these push buttons broken, it's all our responsibility to make sure that we report it right away. Thank you, Brad. I appreciate it. Mr. Chair, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mancini. I won't ask which character you portrayed at Disney. There we go. Councillor Cuddle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, the item I wished to speak to was exactly what Councillor Mancini just brought up. I too was very impressed by the presentation yesterday, and Brad has answered all of the questions I had in regards to that presentation. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Cleary.
Well, I just love you guys so much, so I want this meeting to keep going. I've put in the chat another motion for a briefing note. So this one is based on an over that Mr. Anglish had included in the report, and there's a briefing note on this, and it relates to a motion that I put forward and Councillor Mancini seconded last year, and a motion that Councillor Cuddle put forward and I seconded just last month, or actually earlier this month. And this is regarding snow clearing for residential sidewalks, especially those around school zones. And I really appreciate staff's work on this. They looked at maps to find out of the 465 kilometers of sidewalks that they clear. How many of those are within the walking boundaries of schools based on the provincial requirement for 1.6 and I think it's 2.2 kilometers for kids walking to school. And so basically what they found was pretty much all of them, except for a handful of kilometers, are inside those school walking zones, if you will. And so the issue is, and I had in the last snowstorm, on Bayers Road, crossing guards and kids traversing 3-4 foot high snowbanks to try and get the kids safely across the crosswalks, because the curb cuts and some of the sidewalks had not been cleared 3 days after, which is even beyond the standard that we have, let alone improving the standard. And so this looks to, right now, our P3 streets, or P3 sidewalks are cleared within 36 hours. That's a day and a half. But remember, Halifax, I brought forward some motions to put our snow standards from the time the snow started versus when it ended. But our standards are from when the snowstorm ends. And oftentimes the snowstorm could last a day, day and a half, 2 days. And so we could, by the time you get to that 36-hour standard, you could have 3 or 4 days of snowfall that had happened, and it had not been cleared up by that point in time, and the contractors are still within the contracts. And so if we really want more people walking around, if we really want more healthy kids, if we want less greenhouse gas emissions in our atmosphere, having kids being able to walk to school is fundamental. And so I have a question though. So let me read the motion. So that the Budget Committee request a briefing note detailing the measures and implications for enhancing residential sidewalk snow clearing standards from 36 hours to 18 hours within the proposed 2021-22 Transportation Public Works budget for consideration in the parking lot as an operating over budget option.
So the motion has been made. Do we have a seconder?
I'll second it. Councillor Morse.
Councillor Morse, thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, so I just have a quick question to Mr. Anguish. So if Brad will remember, a couple of years ago, we had a similar report about sidewalk snow clearing and whether we continued to do it on residential streets. And he had indicated at that time that we'd save about $1.6 million, but really it would only be $1 million because we'd probably want to put the 600,000 into our senior snow clearing program and double that. So when I look at this, I have a question on page 3 of the report. It indicates the cost of clearing P3 sidewalks is 6.7 million. Is that all sidewalks or just the P3? Because just a couple of years ago, we were told it was only about 1.6 million that we'd save if we stopped doing the P3 sidewalks.
Thanks, Councillor. I'm going to have to call a friend on that one. I'm going to ask Bev Odette to speak to that, please. If she's dialed in.
Oh, can't hear you, Bev.
Bev, we can't hear you. You're not muted. We just can't hear you.
Probably your microphone settings.
Oh. Technology is wonderful.
Can you pull up page 3 of the report?
While they're looking for that, Mr. Chair.
No?
Yes, Bev, we can hear you now.
Thank you. Thank you. First time on Zoom. Please forgive me. Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, we would actually need to go back and look at what was based in those costs from a few years ago, that first report you're referring to. I know now the report, the most current report is based on our current contract prices. We had some great increases in those prices, so we'd have to analyze, you know, what we accumulated there a few years ago that you're looking at. So off the top of my head, I can't answer that with any confidence until I take a look at that earlier report from a few years back.
Okay, and the reason I asked for that is because it indicates that the cost could be 3.5 to 4.5 million. And so
Yes.
if we're only spending from the previous reports, $1.6 million on those P3 streets.
Right.
And even if now we're spending over 6 million, that seems like a doubling, or from the old numbers, a tripling of the cost, and now almost a doubling of the cost. So I guess what I'm getting at is the time is such that it's not like you're doing it twice or 3 times. You're still only doing it once. You're just moving the time frame and saying you got to do it faster. And so I guess it's the same people, it's the same equipment. Is it the savings is because the contractors are prioritizing other things like streets, for example, and they get to the sidewalks at the end of it, and that's what costs them so little?
No, through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, that's not it at all. In fact, this year in-house, we made a change in agreement with the union that we manage our streets and our sidewalks totally independent of each other. It's completely different staffing. It's completely different equipment. So you can appreciate when we have that 3-scale priority, they can move the same equipment from priority 1 to priority 2 to priority 3. You know, as long as the equipment is healthy and keeps working, that's ideally how it works. So the minute we increase or we remove the P3, what we're challenging our contractors with is getting more staff, probably getting more equipment. Actually, I'm confident they would need more equipment because they would have to have more machines on the street at the same time. So that's the challenge, and that's the efficiencies in having the 3 priority system is that you can continue that rolling through of the storm. Of most importance is with the priority rating to us is when the plows initially hit the sidewalk. So if it's a priority 1, it may be after 2 centimeters, priority 2 after 5 centimeters, and so on. So So for us, that's, from an operations perspective, even though the stop time is important with respect to judging the standards and whether they've met the standards, which, we've got demonstrated on the website for the public to see visually. It really is about when we start plowing, when we start our operational activity that we think has the most impact on the residents. We did have challenges. That bad storm this year, we had plummeting temperatures. So ordinarily we would have very productive backshift operations on contract and in-house who would have been clearing that product from the streets with the assistance of the salt product, breaking it down, and the salt just wasn't working for us. The temperatures were very cold, if you recall, that week. So we had melt through the day, which the sidewalks created like a windrow, and then that refroze at night, and nothing was working. And the sidewalk equipment isn't really hardy, so it was breaking down. Ours was breaking down. The contractors were breaking down. It was very slow going. So very unique storm in that respect with the temperatures. Usually it's not that cold when we get that kind of a storm, but certainly that one was. So that's how it works. So that's the efficiencies, and that's why there's more cost once we once we get to the P2. I like that. That lightens the mood.
She's on her way to work. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Stoddard.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have one point I'd like to make in connection with sidewalks. I'd like to request that TPW, through Brad and his team, revisit the missing segment of sidewalk that is missing between St. Margaret's Bay Road and Brentwood. Staff has advised that
if I may, Councillor Stoddard, this is on the motion related to sidewalk snow clearing.
Okay, sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I will add your name on the list to come back on the main motion.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I want to preface my comments with kudos to Councillor Clary. You are just vigilant in making sure that every piece of TPW has some opportunity to have reconsideration on, and that's impressive. So well done. I am feeling more and more like the notion of maintaining the tax rate and not burdening the residents this year in particular, coming still through a pandemic and on changes. It's drifting away, knowing how it's grown, that the parking lot is growing and growing and growing. I'm struggling with the notion that the changes in the service level of sidewalk clearing is going to trump that. I'm not going to. I will support a briefing note. I just want to be on the record of saying that the briefing note is a tool that we have as counselors to bring issues to the table for consideration in this budget deliberation. It's not a decision. It is a measure to get information to make a decision. Sometimes our decisions here in budget debate is conveyed in the public as decisions are being made. So I want to be clear that supporting this particular one, I just see the bubble growing and growing and growing in our parking lot, and ultimately, we're going to have to pick and choose if there are things that we can keep and that we can not. And I'm not convinced this one is strong enough to support at a later date. I just want to be on the record for showing that the parking lot is growing to the point now where we are going to be particularly challenged to retain the rate tax rate and the considerations for what we are burdening the taxpayers with. And I'm not a fan of that. I continue not to be a fan of that. And I'll support this motion for information only. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Cuttle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the whole sidewalk clearing piece in the wintertime was important to me as well. And I do realize that it is a very costly initiative to pursue, to your point, Councillor Kent. And hence why I wanted to look specifically at sidewalks within school zones, and not necessarily all the sidewalks. I think there is a reality in balancing budget and balancing safe streets and how people move around and how we prioritize snow clearing. And I think that we need to be strategic, and I think that's what we need to ask staff to do, is to be strategic, to say, here's how people move around their communities. Here's who's moving around, and how do we help make that everyday experience better for people and encourage them to get out and walk to school, take into consideration that students within a certain area have to walk to school. In many cases, so do their parents, with all kinds of different levels of need around accessibility. And that, we think about this in a strategic way. And so where we prioritize streets, kind of the main arterials versus the secondary streets and, the third tier, could we think about that in terms of sidewalks, in how people use sidewalks? And so right now, the priority for sidewalks aligns with the priority of streets. And that doesn't 100% consider, take into consideration sidewalk priorities. Streets and sidewalks are used they're used very differently within neighborhoods. So, I know we have a staff report coming back on this, and I'm just wondering, with asking for a briefing note, is that to kind of accelerate the information that we're waiting for in the staff report, or so we get it into the budget for next year? And is this briefing note enough to consider that kind of strategic piece that perhaps I was looking for when I made the motion to request additional information in that original staff report that you put forward, Councillor Cleary? If anyone can follow that thread. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anguish.
Yeah,
go ahead.
For clarity, Councillor Cuttle and for council, staff has delivered on your motion. We were able to deliver on that on Tuesday. The briefing note was required. Councillor Cleary has summed it up. Essentially, once we overlapped all the school zones with the residential sidewalks, essentially they were all covered. So we have dealt with that particular motion that you made. Obviously, if there is a different approach you want staff to take to look at which school zones might get it, which ones don't, based on volumes, that is something that we have to take away. There is, just to be blunt, there is no way that we would be able to turn around something like that in the next couple of weeks. So that is answering that. I do want to just also address Councillor Cleary's. I found the reference he had to the $1 million. That was in fact, the first budget that I had carried forward from Mr. Zwanica. So to clear up that $1 million piece, that was not the cost of residential sidewalks. That was a potential service cut. That number reflected what it was to off-ramp those contracts during that year, and staff's best estimate of, because there's all kinds of considerations like breaking contracts. And so that $1 million number represented staff's best estimate that if council said, hey, we don't want to service sidewalks any longer, that would have been the amount recouped in that particular year. So that's why you're seeing such a diverse representation in those numbers. But thank you for bringing it up.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chair, very much. Just on this issue, it's a tricky issue. You know, a number of years ago, Council voted to extend the sidewalk snow clearing to a number of districts mainly in Peninsular Halifax. I was against that. I voted against that because, number one, we were giving a lot of people a service they didn't want. They were doing it themselves. Number two, we were charging them for that. And number three, we were increasing the expectations. And the advantage of doing it sort of broadly, sidewalk clearing and taking it away from residents, is if it dramatically improves the service. I think in a lot of cases, residents were doing that service, and certainly we heard from a lot of them who didn't want that changed. Having said that, we are where we are. We're going to come back in a month or so with all of these requests that are being made for the parking lot. And look, I would be very honest with you. I think we're going to have some money to deal with then. I think we're going to have more surplus than we've expected. I think the transfer is going to continue to grow. So I think that we're going to have some things to deal with on that front. But I just want to be clear, in this one case, we have so far added, prior to today, the list that Jane sent around this morning, we've added 18 or 19 things to the parking lot, including the transit stop clearing, enhanced transit stop clearing, and the calming, traffic calming measures. Those are big issues. But all of those things together are $2.9 million. This is one item looking for $3.5 to $4.5 million. That's a very significant ask. And I certainly have always supported complete streets and making sure that we invest in sidewalks and making pedestrian and bike friendly city. And there's a lot of ways that we can do that. But just to be very clear, this is a very, very significant amount of money. And when it comes back, if it appears that this will pass, when this comes back, we're going to have a decision to make on what looks like $3.5 to $4.5 million, which is dramatically higher than all the parking lot items that we've added so far, including some big ones. So just to be, this is not a small one. This is a very significant one. Would it make a difference? I'm sure it would make a difference, but we need to balance it against the size of the request that this is. And it would have an impact on the tax rate. So far, all the things that we've added in the parking lot would add $10 to the average tax bill. This would be probably $15 to $18 on the tax bill. Yeah, it's always more service for more cost, and that's the question that we have to balance. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate following the mayor here because he has some of the same concerns that I do on this one. It is a large dollar value. And you know, I'm less optimistic about, well, we're going to have lots of options. I mean, this is an ongoing thing. This is a tax rate piece. You should not be using things like surplus, one-time federal gas tax money to pay for ongoing operation things. Those sorts of things, surplus found federal dollars that are not going to reoccur. Those are the things we use to, or we should be, in my opinion, those are the things we should be using for, you know, our one-time big picture transformational type expenses, the transit system, the fixing of transforming streets like Dutch Village Road. These are good uses for that sort of money. Using money like that to cover off something like ongoing contracts for snow clearing, that is not fiscally prudent. So this is a tax rate piece. When I look at our list, I'm more interested in the increasing the transit stop piece for this year if we're going to do some snow clearing enhancements. I think when we have to be a little bit cautious this year because some of what it allows us to balance the budget is one-time assistance, right? We don't quite know where assessments are going to be next year. We hope that we're going to all be putting the pandemic behind us, but there is still a fair degree of risk to all of that. So, you know, this is one I think it could be a nice enhancement, but I'd be more comfortable taking a look at this next year rather than this year. So I'm not going to vote to add this to the parking list at this time, simply for that reason. The one final comment I'll just make is that, sometimes we're a little too prescriptive sometimes when we give standards, because as I recall of reading that briefing note, it would be more appropriate to do 24 hours versus 18, because the street clearing standard on those for the plow going down the road on those P3 streets is 24 hours, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm recalling the briefing note correctly. So it would make more sense to align those two, so you're not clearing a sidewalk that then's getting buried by the street plow right afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I am going to sort this through the briefing note, but what I'm hoping staff can help outline and restate, because I feel like we already heard it earlier, both here and in other venues, is we are effectively hitting a better standard in most snowstorms. I mean, I guess what I'm worried about, and it's funny, I said this to Sean, I think yesterday, is to Councillor Cleary, is we could spend a whole bunch of money so they could all gear up, but we're still going to be saying that when we have 30 centimeters or 25 centimeters or more of snow, that all bets are off. And so we'd spend this money, but if we had a storm like the one we had 2 snows ago, we still wouldn't hit those standards and we still wouldn't be making people happy. On the rest of the time, my observation, and this is the kind of information, I don't know how we suss it out from staff or if different contractors have been behaving differently, but on a regular snowstorm, we've exceeded all those standards and the residents have been very happy. I've gotten more, I said earlier, no one emails you when something good happens, and that's not entirely true. The ratio is about 10 to 1 or 20 to 1. And I've gotten more emails about how snow clearing has been good this winter than I've ever gotten before, which is 3, but still. So I guess what I'm saying is I do support getting a briefing note. I want to know more about it, but I feel like we are getting to that like last 15% law of diminishing returns, that we can keep plowing money into it, pun not intended, and it's not going to give us sufficiently better service than we're already getting. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Blackburn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I just had a quick question for Brad, just with regards to our clearing standards. Where are we compared to other cities in Canada? Are we on the upper end of things, the lower end of things, mid-pack? Just wondering what our clearing standards as they currently sit for sidewalks, how that stacks up against other cities in Canada.
Thanks for the question, Councillor. Maybe best to just recirculate the snow standard report that we did not too long ago. We did do some jurisdictional scans. How do we stack up? Certainly we don't have, there's 2 things that go on as we learned from the analysis that we received from KPMG. There's what a municipality declares as their standard, and then there's the service you get. And the one thing that KPMG noted was that we are hitting our standards on a very frequent basis, except for those severe storms where, as said, all bets are off. The standards don't apply. We have a very high adherence to standards. There are other cities that have higher standards. However, they pointed out that, and again, it's anecdotally, that they're not hitting the standards like Halifax does. So that was one challenge in the benchmarking that we did, because if you just look at the standards, that's one thing. But if you look at start to examine how often do you hit those standards, that's a different ball game. And in fact, the consultants themselves noted that the cities they lived in, they were not clearly living up to their standards. So that's the anecdotal part of it. But we can certainly distribute that report so you can see where you are relative to the rest of the country. But we are in that top pack in terms of standards. That's the best I'll do for now, and then we'll we'll redistribute the report so that everybody can just take another look at it. There was certainly in the KPMG there was a widespread look at some benchmark cities.
Got it. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other speakers on the list, so Councillor Cleary to close, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to the mayor's comments, Councillor Mason and I have talked about sidewalk snow clearing, before I got on council, certainly since I've been on council quite a bit. And on 2 occasions, I've tried to give back sidewalk snow clearing to the residents. Council voted against me. And on 1 occasion, I brought a petition from a group of the entire street who wanted to opt out. And council said, no, they have to keep it. So my challenge to my colleagues is, if you're ready to give sidewalk snow clearing back to residents, I'm good with that. We can vote on that. Maybe I'll bring it in as an under in our next meeting. But in the briefing note, if I could just add to Councillor Mason's point, if I could ask Mr. Anguish, would it be possible in the amount of time to look at, instead of the 18-hour option, the 24-hour option? Could you bring us a few options to see, what that would look like? Because I agree with Councillor Mason that on a typical small-scale snow event, we do meet or exceed our standards this year. And in fact, I've even had residents email me and indicate that this year we've done a pretty decent job, except for that big snowstorm we had, where the temperatures did not play to our advantage. So is a 24-hour option, is that something you could include in the briefing note as well as the 18-hour option?
Certainly we can. I think the key thing here is you can see the range of the number we're giving you, 3.5 to 4.5 million. And quite frankly, that's probably tight. The key point in the report we delivered on Tuesday, and I'm sure most councillors haven't had a chance to read it, and I completely understand that. When you do, what you'll see is a couple things here that I just probably worth repeating on risk. This has to be negotiated. We have to have direction from council no later than May 5th in order to meet the notice. And then, because of 6 months notice on the contracts, and then we have to sit down with the service providers. Then we start haggling over things, but then the real issue occurs where equipment has to be ordered. And I can tell you, the year that we re-scrambled the grass contracts, and that was the year the ice stayed in the ground. And when we get new service providers or new standards and they need new equipment, and especially coming out of COVID, this could be risky. So I just want to I'm not trying to derail this by any stretch. I just want to make sure there's a reality on, there is risk associated in terms of, can we pull it off this year? Certainly we'll sit down with the service providers five service providers in 9 areas, I believe, and work through this, but there is a risk on timing. So I do want to emphasize that. That said, we'll certainly look at the 24 hours and see if that makes any discernible difference to our estimate at this time. And we can do that in the briefing. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Anguish. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. There are no further speakers, so I'm going to call for the question and hand it over to the clerk.
Beginning with District 13, Councillor Lovelace. Councillor Lovelace. 14, Councillor Blackburn.
Voting no on the motion.
Voting yes.
Thank you, Councillor Lovelace. District 15, Mayor Russell. Sorry, Chair Russell.
Thank you very much. Against the motion.
Deputy Mayor Outhit.
Voting no.
1, Councillor Daigle Gammon.
Apologies, voting against the motion.
2, Councillor Hensby.
Negatory.
3, Councillor Kent.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I've changed my mind as well. I'll be voting against the motion.
4, Councillor Purdy.
Voting no.
5, Councillor Austin.
Voting against.
6, Councillor Mancini.
Voting in favor of the motion.
7, Councillor Mason.
Voting for the briefing note.
8, Councillor Smith.
4.
9, Councillor Cleary.
Yes.
10, Councillor Morse.
For the motion.
11, Councillor Cuttle.
For the motion.
12, Councillor Stoddard.
Voting for the motion.
Mayor Savage.
Against.
Thank you. By my count, that is 9 to 8. Mr. Clerk, if you could confirm that.
I have 9 votes against, 8 votes for.
That matches mine. Okay, thank you very much. That motion fails. We are back on the main motion. Councillor Stoddard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm having a problem with getting some of the buttons to work. Excuse me. I'd like to request that TPW revisit a missing segment of a sidewalk that's missing between St. Margaret's Bay and Brentwood. Staff has advised that this gap in the sidewalk is above average and is to be reviewed in 22-23 capital program. My issue is I have seniors and physically challenged residents that have to get off the sidewalk, walk 5 minutes, and then step up to another end of the sidewalk. I don't want to wait until there is an injury or a lawsuit. It's been noted that there is a trail available, but there is a rough there's a rough terrain and it's not maintained, and I don't think it's acceptable for walkers, stiff joints, and/or canes. This is also the main path to a local convenience store for seniors and others to attend for milk and small groceries. I believe we need to have compassion for our seniors and physically challenged, and as well, the optics of it are bad. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. So I'm wondering if you are making a motion for a briefing note related to that, or are you, I'm not sure what you're requesting.
I'm not sure. If I get some help from you, Mr. Chair, I would appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I see Mr. Traves has popped up. Go ahead.
I understand from the councillor, Mr. Chair, through you to the committee, is essentially a briefing note for consideration, the budget adjustment list in terms of that capital item.
Thank you, Mr. Traves. What he said.
What he said. Fair enough. Thank you very much, Councillor Stoddard. Do we have
Ian will put it out.
I'll second that.
Councillor Blackburn would second the briefing note on the missing sidewalk. Is there any discussion on that motion, or do we want to
question on the motion?
Do we want to wait for a couple of minutes until we see the motion as it's been constructed by the clerk? I do see that Mr. Anguish has raised his hand.
Yeah, in case it helps with the motion, we certainly are aware of this segment, as there are many missing segments throughout the municipality. We are, first of all, this one does require design work. There is basically there's a ditch, as the councillor would be aware, there's a ditch in this area, and so forth. Therefore, there is design work required. This is identified within the overlay program, this segment, within the next 2 to 4 years. And we'll get addressed within that time frame. As far as a budget item for this year, in terms of changing the budget, there's like I said, there's design work required. So the work can't be done in this cycle in any event. However, you know, we can certainly keep the council informed of our work in this area, but the design work will advance to size up with the current overlay program, which, as I said, and as the councillor had indicated, in the 22-23 timeframe. But there is design work required.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Outhet, I think that the clerk is going to be coming forward with the motion and putting that in the chat, but in the meantime, go ahead, Councillor Outhet.
Yeah, just very quickly, with great respect to our new colleague, Iona, I'm just wondering if staff is saying that it's sort of in the plan when some other work will be done, and if they're saying that the planning work couldn't be done this year, it seems to me that this motion might be kind of moot. I don't really want to vote against it because I want to support my new colleague, but it might be worth considering her withdrawing this right now, since it's just not feasible. Just something for her to consider. She doesn't have to take my advice, but it's just If staff says it can't be done this year, then there's no sense putting it in the parking lot.
Thank you very much.
Can I respond, Mr. Chair?
Absolutely.
All right, I understand that it's not available in the budget, but if we have a surplus, I think this is very important to the district. There is the risk that seniors or somebody with a walker would fall, and then that again would, like I said, could possibly be an injury. This has been on the books since I don't know how long. Residents have been trying to get this fixed. And I think it's time that they got the attention that they need. And if there is a surplus, I think it should be done.
Chair, just to respond to that, and I know nobody's suggesting that this isn't important and urgent and shouldn't be done. I'm just, when staff says that they don't have time to design it to be done this year, taking money out of the surplus, I don't think would necessarily solve that. But I'll let Brad speak to that. But don't think for a moment I'm not supportive of this. I'm just saying it doesn't sound like the timing is right. So it's kind of a moot discussion.
Okay. Thank you. I
But we'll get Brad to confirm. Thank you both.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cleary, unless, I'm sorry, Mr. Anguish.
Yeah, I just want to clarify my remarks to indicate that we could not design and construct this segment in this construction season. So I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, and I appreciate Councillor Stoddard's chutzpah. We all have sidewalk or lack of sidewalk in all of our districts. I've got many. I've got entire neighborhoods without sidewalks, and I've been trying for the 4+ years I've been a councillor now to get them, and I've got a few pieces here and there. And there is a process, and I'm going to vote against the motion just because we do have a process that deals with these, and I've got a number of sidewalks that are in the queue going forward, and I certainly wouldn't want, So one of the things that staff have is they have a list of criteria, and they have a process and a ranking. And if we just insert ourselves as council, say, well, my district's more important than your district, so let's do mine now, then we circumvent that professional evidence-based system. And then it would just be a free-for-all. It would be about gathering coalitions and cliques, and I'm going to get my people to vote for this one, you get your people to vote for that one. And that politicizing sidewalks is not really something we should be doing. We should leave it up to the engineers, the professionals. They do the traffic counts, they do the pedestrian counts, they know where the origins and destinations are, they know the environment that they do the site visits on. And so it just, in terms of that, and I, again, appreciate what she's trying to do. I would do the same thing, but I respect the evidence-based system that we have in place. And I like it when staff bring forward during our budget the capital list and say, here are the sidewalks we're going to be able to do this year. And to Mr. Anguish's point, especially, and I saw this with the sidewalk that we put in front of the 500 block on Herring Cove Road, when you have ditches, when you have culverts, when you have these things, I think that one took roughly 3 years from the time it went to TSC to council to be constructed, because there is design work, there is budgeting, there are all those things that have to happen. So again, kudos to Councillor Stoddard, but I have to vote against it because I respect the system that we have in place. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The motion has been pasted into the chat. It is that Budget Committee request a briefing note on the replacement of the missing sidewalks on St. Margaret's and Brentwood within the 2021-2022 Transportation and Public Works budget for consideration in the parking lot as an operating over budget option. Would appreciate, Councillor Stoddard, if you could just confirm that that is the right segment, that the streets are correct. And in the meantime, Councillor Austin, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, Largely, I agree with Councillor Cleary on this one. I won't be able to vote for it, which pains me because, you know, especially a new colleague who really hasn't asked us for much of anything yet. You know, the instinctive, the heartstrings are very much wanting to be supportive, but you know, I think we do have a process for these, and you know, I just wanted to say that Councillor Cleary's point about that, you know, we have to be cautious about over politicizing these sorts of things. That said, there is a role for us to play in these processes. Not everything is captured perfectly in, you know, just the kind of very cold bureaucratic sort of analysis. So there is a role to play. It is, to me, it's more to be played on the conversations in the lead up to budget rather than trying to move something here at this time in this sort of way. And I think Councillor Stoddart is off to a very good start here on that, because certainly this little piece of sidewalk has more eyes and attention on it now than it otherwise would have. So I personally, I would just say that over the last 4 years, I've had, I think I look around my district, and you know, if you do the work of engaging with staff, and you know, you can make good things happen by piggybacking on work that's already, you know, slated to happen anyway, and making sure that you're making the most of all those opportunities. Frankly, I'd be quite there are places in my district that would kill to be on the list to be getting a sidewalk within the next year or two. I have places where I unfortunately have to deliver news to people where it's like, I'm sorry that, you know, we really have to wait for the road to fail before there's any chance that you might get a sidewalk there. So, you know, at this time, I just can't vote for this. I'm sorry, Councillor Stoddart.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see Mr. Traves has popped up. Go ahead, Mr. Traves.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to remind the committee that Council has finalized the capital budget for 21-22. That's not to say that there could not be amendment to that, but we would have to look at the procedural pieces that as well in terms of then making an adjustment to that. Recognizing, of course, that if a tax rate goes up to provide more operating, then there's more available to move from operating to capital. So it's not undoable, but it would just take a little bit more procedural wrangling to now change the capital budget.
Just as a point of order, if I may, Mr. Chair, if this, as much as I'm going to vote against it, now I'm going to argue the other side. As my understanding is, for capital items that were over, I mean, they're still being collected in the parking lot. So this really, I mean,
that's correct.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to find a way, I think, to support Councillor Stoddart's efforts here. And I wonder, Brad, if you could just clarify again why it can't be done. Is it that it can't be done because there's no room in the budget, or is it a construction piece that is not able to be done? Because I guess if it's not construction, if it's priorities, is there an ability for a priority to change something, come out so that can go in?
Fair question. Thank you. Look, it is simply that the work has not commenced on this piece. So typically, as you know, and I think just to try and sum up what I think most council is aware of, we do have a ranking system for all of this. And then we look at how that dovetails with our streetworks program, so that when we go in, you know, the biggest complaint we get is we tear a community up and then we tear it up again. So in this case, we're trying to align the road work with the sidewalk. As I said, the overlay program for this particular segment, which is 200 meters long, but has a ditch. This is a major piece of road work. So to try to advance it in isolation of the road work means you're going to get the construction twice, and you're going to get the cost inefficiencies that go with it. What staff is currently recommending is that it be done with the road overlay program, which is seeing it done in the next 2 to 4 years. And again, that information is pretty accurate, given that we've just gone through the 4-year capital plan exercise. That is the best time to do it, because you're getting the road done at the same time as, in this particular case, there is a ditch. So this is a major sidewalk construction. It may only be 200 meters long, but there is drainage works to be done. And so, as most councilors are aware, drainage, big dollars. Ed Surratt's estimate right now is this is north of $500,000. How far? Not sure. That's for the sidewalk piece alone. Just put some numbers around it. So again, not trying to derail this, just trying to be real. It will have to be designed. It should be aligned with the roadworks in the area, and it is coming up in the program. But as far as if council was to say tomorrow, TBW, here's $1 million, get her done. We couldn't get it out the door this year. We can't design it fast enough in order to get the construction completed. That's the reality of where we are today. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Brad. I think that's certainly relevant information that Councillor Stoddard can have in a concise way. I guess at this stage, if it's physically not possible, then perhaps we can have a commitment from you and from staff to work with Councillor Stoddard on a communications piece. This is clearly a piece that is important to her district and important to her residents. And if there are in fact some concerns around safety, I think it is responsible that the municipality help and support that particular councillor to get that communication piece squared up for that district. So I'll leave it there. And I'm not sure I can support this particular motion, but I certainly want to show my support to Councillor Stoddard and anything I can do to help her move this along. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So with what we just heard from Mr. Anguish, that really, you're killing me, Councillor, because I want to vote for it, but I'm not going to. And I'm going to say why. Like, there's two reasons why. One is if it can't be done this year, then I don't think it's worth sending staff off to do a briefing note. So my ask to you would be that you withdraw the motion at this point, but with this new information that you've gotten, and work with staff and communicate with your residents about that. But the second thing is to kind of the point that Sam made, to Councillor Austin made, is we've been trying these last 8 years to really drive toward an evidence-based decision-making model. And what that means is that every resident is convinced their street needs street calming, as an example, more than any other street in the entire municipality. And most of them are not right. And many of them live in my district. So when you look at the street calming that we've done, the traffic calming that we've done in the last 3 years, the first project that's going to happen in District 7 is happening on Cornwall Street to address shortcutting off of Oxford onto Jubilee this coming construction season. That's it. We don't get traffic calming. The reason we don't is because most of the suburban streets that were overbuilt and are too wide have way worse speeding problems than we do. And so I don't want to move to, as has been said, forming cliques and fighting and making the decisions here based on politics. I want it to be based on evidence, because I need that to go back to my residents to say, no, we're not doing Shirley Street, we're doing Schuylkill Drive, right? And I support that because it's more dangerous, and I want that, even though it's not in my district. So you have to trust the process, right? And it doesn't mean we can't change the model of what inputs we want to evaluate the evidence. But I really, I think the best move here is to withdraw the motion and go back and work with staff to make sure that it's a priority in the next couple of years as a part of a larger capital project. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. We have no further speakers. Councillor Stoddard, would you like to close? Or would you like us to proceed to the vote? Councillor Stoddard, you are muted.
I think at this time, where I've heard from all of the councillors and I've heard from Mr. Anguish, it sounds like there is a plan, and I will withdraw at this time, but I would appreciate staff working with me to communicate to the residents that this is in the plan, because as I said earlier, they've been trying to get this for 8-10 years, and as their new councillor, I'm trying to do the best I can for the residents. So thank you. Appreciate your comments.
Thank you very much. I believe it was Councillor Blackburn who seconded that. Are you okay with it being withdrawn?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's the proper course of action, and good on you, Councillor Stoddard, but we'll get her done eventually.
Thank
Absolutely.
you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. We are back on the main motion, and Councillor Cleary.
Actually, I'm good, Mr. Chair.
In that case, we have no further speakers. Thank you very much, everybody.
Question on the motion. Question on the motion.
Question
right
on the main motion. There we go. Thank you very much, Councillor Mason. I'm going to hand it over to the clerk for the question on the main motion.
Beginning with District 13, Councillor Lovelace.
Voting yes.
14, Councillor Blackburn.
Voting in favor of the motion.
15, Chair Russell.
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Outhet.
Voting yes.
1, Councillor Daigle Gammon.
Voting in favor of the motion.
2, Councillor Hensby.
Affirmative.
3, Councillor Kent.
In favor of the motion.
4, Councillor Purdy.
In favor.
5, Councillor Austin.
In favor.
6, Councillor Mancini.
In favor of the motion.
7, Councillor Mason.
In favor.
8, Councillor Smith.
In favor.
9, Councillor Cleary.
Yes.
10, Councillor Morse.
In favor.
11, Councillor Cuddle.
In favor?
12, Councillor Stoddard.
In favor of the motion.
Mayor Savage.
In favor.
Thank you very much. It was close, but that motion passes. We have nothing further on the agenda. We approved the in-camera minutes when we met on Wednesday. So we will be reconvening again. Our next meeting is next Wednesday, March 31st, where we will be talking about the Parks and Recreation budget. Can I have a motion to adjourn, please?
I so move.
Moved by Councillor Blackburn. We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.